Hi, and welcome back. Today we're talking about how much community development activity you need. So we've gone through and explained some of the ways to take community development credit, but what keeps compliance officers and CRA officers up at night is it enough? And if some of it gets thrown out, will we still have enough? So today we're going to go through kind of how to set those goals, how to set those targets, and of course, just in case things do get thrown out, you want to set them a little bit higher so you have a little bit of a buffer from the targets and the goals, and so that you know you're going to come out with at least a satisfactory rating. So that's going to be the very first part of this is you talk to your management and say, what do we want for a rating? What is our goal? Because if you're going for a satisfactory and you're okay with that, that's going to be a lot different than if you're going for an outstanding. Now, I don't think anybody's going to be shooting for needs to improve or lower. Okay, so the very first thing you're going to do is you need to go out and find some comparable banks. Now, if you're really lucky, your last examiner may have told you which banks they use for your comparisons. And if you're a first-time ISB, you don't know that at all. But a lot of times they're not telling you, and they don't say it in the PE, although it'll give you information on what their performance was that you're being compared to. So you can sometimes back into that if you go and search a lot of PEs. But you're basically going to go out, depending on your regulator. I would recommend, you don't have to, but I would recommend trying to keep your comparables within your regulator, because this is one area that they vary a lot in what they require for definitions, what they require for documentation. And so try to stick, if you can, to the same regulator. So a lot of the banks, community banks that are going to be using this video are going to be with the FDIC. So you would just Google FDIC CRA performance evaluations and you'll get their search. Now, the OCC and the Fed, they have their own. You'll Google that and you'll get to a similar page like this. And what you're going to do is, for today's video, we're going to use a theoretical Michigan bank just to give you an example of how you're going to build a spreadsheet and come up with some of these targets. So you're going to look at this, you're going to drop down and you're going to say, I'm not going to do it, I've already done this. You're going to want other banks' performances in Michigan, and then you're going to try your very best to keep the exam criteria or procedures the same. So if you're ISB like we're doing, you would select ISB and you're going to get a list. And typically the more recent, the better. But what you're going to find is finding a good comparable is going to be slim picking. Sometimes you won't even have one good comparable and you're just going to try to get 3 and 4 best fits, best you can, and go off of that. But you're going to go through and you're going to find a few that are reasonably good fits, and you're going to build a spreadsheet or other mechanism to track this similar to this one. Now, this is very simplified because these videos are for people that are just trying to get their feet under them. So you're going to list out your banks and your CRA type. If you have to go ISB and large bank, you could. It's not ideal by any means. You're going to list out where they're operating. Asset size, you want ones, if you can, relatively close, and then what the assessment areas are. And these are the criteria you're going to use to pick your comparables, as well as, lending type. You'll look at their loan portfolio and see what it is. So a lot of these that we got in this are a lot of commercial. So if we were a commercial bank in these areas, these would be good fits. You got one that's a little bit mixed, and then one commercial and real estate. And then looking at the assessment areas, this top one isn't a great comparable if you're comparing to the other ones, but we've got a lot of non-MSA assessment areas in here. We've got 2 that have Grand Rapids, and so those would be okay if for example, if we were a commercial bank here, we'd probably pick these 2 in the bottom one, right? We're probably not going up to Saginaw and Midland. Just for those that don't know, let's just pull up a quick map of the area that we're talking about. We're not talking the Detroit area and Ann Arbor. That's going to be a completely different area, different circumstances. So you probably wouldn't want to cross those, right? Because the opportunities there are going to be completely different than out in the Grand Rapids area. You see here the rural areas where these other banks are. You've got Lansing and the Midland Bay City area up there. So that's kind of the geographic area if you're not familiar with it. So you're gonna go do that. You're gonna find a few good comparables based on your asset size, the geography, and the lending type that they have. And you're gonna do the best that you can. Very rarely do you get a very good fit. And sometimes if you have a very good fit, but it's a different regulator, then pull it in. So once you have, using that, some good comparables, or at least decent comparables, then you want to go into the PEs and you want to document some ratios. Now, The regulators will tell you this is quantitative and qualitative, but the qualitative aspect, you can argue it, and you would need a very good narrative, and you're going to want to have a sit down with the examiner that's doing it and rating it. But honestly, then they go out and they have consultations if it's anything out of the norm. And so a lot of that gets lost. So unfortunately, a lot of this remains quantitative. And so when you look at these PEs, you should have ratios that those examiners calculated. Now, I've simplified it just for this very simple video to give you a base to build off of. So I have a loan ratio, an investment ratio, and number of services. Now, when you go into those PEs, you're going to find different loan ratios. What I've used here is loans to average total loans. You'll typically see something like that, as well as community development loans to total assets. As well as for investments, you'll see your community development investments to the investment portfolio, typically your average investments, and you're going to see investments to total assets. Now, it gets skewed because if you use the ratios that I'm using for this example, if you have a loan to value or loan to deposits or a high one, then the specific ones will vary a lot. In that case, you might want to combine the loans and the investments to community development loans and investments to total assets, and you can build that. But for one where it's varied between the two, like right here, commercial bank, you see a 1.3 and 11. That's one where you've got a big difference. So you probably have a higher loan to deposit ratio driving that, where a couple investments drives the investment ratio up, and then the loan ratio gets driven down. So that would be the type of situation where you might be considering that instead of these specific loan ratio investment ratios. So you're going to go out and you're going to pull up those P's. So I've got 5 P's in there, even though I said one wasn't a good comparable. And where you're going to find this information, let's see, this is United Bank of Michigan. Decided not to pick on Iowa today. And a lot of this stuff is right at the beginning of the conclusions on performance criteria. You don't want to be getting these numbers. Actually, they won't be in there if you get in down to the specific information on the assessment areas, although you will find that later in the evaluation. So we're going to scroll past all the the scoping and kind of the generic stuff that goes on top, and you get into, okay, so this is the lending test, and it'll be right after the lending test will be, where you're going to find this, community development test. Community development test at the bank-wide level still before they start breaking it out. And you'll see community development loans. And within that, you will start, typically about halfway through, you're going to see some of these ratios. So community development loans represent 4.6% of total loans. So that's total loans, and they should tell you specifically what numbers they're using, because unfortunately it still varies a little bit. Hopefully the region and the states are doing it the same, so your comparables are hopefully all doing it the same. Otherwise, that gets messy. So right here, you've got a 4.6 to total loans. Oops, I don't want to drag that over. I don't know if they did a total assets on this one. You could always calculate it because they do give you the dollar amount. And then you've got your comparable ratios. And so that's what they're doing on their end, but really for your purposes, you're going to steal this ratio basically for this case. And you're going to go through and you're going to do the same thing for investments. Let's see what this one has here. So right up here represents 0.2% of total assets and 3% of total securities. A lot of the times you'll see it say total or average total securities. So watch that wording. Hopefully they're all actually being calculated the same, even if the wording's a little bit different and they're just being a little bit more precise. Unfortunately, the regulation doesn't tell them what they have to use, so you do end up seeing some different things. So keep an eye on that. So you're going to do that, and you're going to go to each one of the ones that you decided was a good comparable, and you're going to document that on your spreadsheet. Well, let's go back to the spreadsheet. So here's what we come up with. You're going to do that for services as well. The thing with services is there's not a very good way, that there's very inconsistent counting on services. One thing I ran into in setting up this videos is one of the comparables only gave community development hours. Now, it's been a thing out there for a long time where especially the specialized regulators, you get an examiner that really loves CRA and they've been doing it for a long time, they actually almost push that you have to do it, but that's not true. You do not have to record community development hours. Can it benefit you? Well, that's the argument. Maybe it gives them more context, but because they don't have to, you shouldn't be using it as a comparable. So in your target and your comparables, you really have to count the number of services provided, which also isn't really consistent in how they count them. So if you're doing a lot of work for one organization and maybe you're on 3 different committees, and if a different person was doing each one, you might be able to say, well, that's 3 services. And you might have another examiner that's only going to count it for 1 because it's one person, one organization. So it gets tricky, and it's not a perfect comparable because it's kind of all over the place. But I've never seen it where they didn't actually list, like this one did. They didn't actually give us a number of services, which shame on the examiner for that. It should be in there for comparison purposes, even if that bank is giving them the hours and they're going to use that to kind of judge their performance as well. So that's the first time I've ever actually run into that. The other thing is, as you go through, you need to make note. You actually need to read the narrative and make notes on things that greatly affect those ratios. So in this first example, 3/4 of the CD loans were made up of PPP loans. Now, hopefully we're getting to a point where you're not going to run into this a lot, but this was during COVID, and that was the government program, the Paycheck Protection Program, where yes, they did. I've heard different things. Sometimes they automatically qualified. Other times they made you document it and prove it. But on the surface, a lot of those, just by definition, were keeping jobs in place and that sort of thing, and keeping businesses afloat. And so a lot of the times that inflated the numbers greatly. Well, in this case, 3/4 of the community development loans were PPP loans. So if you're in a period where that wasn't even available, you want to back those out, right? So in this case, 12.7 for the loan ratio, that's high because it was inflated by those PPP loans. So going forward, and when you want to develop your target, you want to back that out, and you're going to end up at about 3.1 or 3.2 that you're actually going to use to set your targets. You also had another one here, half of the CD loans were PPP. So that's actually, that 3.4 would actually be about 1.7 if PPP loans aren't going to be available in future years, which it's not. So you really got like a 3.1 or 3.2 there and a 1.7 here. So when you look at all of these that you're going to be comparing yourself to, you're going to look and say, hey, if we get a 3 or 4 in that ratio, we should be sitting pretty good. So your target might be in that area. You're going to do the same thing with investments. Now, investments, you're going to see wilder swings, especially if they don't have a large investment portfolio, and 1 or 2 investments can really drive it. Plus, you've got prior period investments that count. So you're going to see a wider range here, like you do. You see all the way from 0.5. You will see 0.0 at times, and you'll see 10, 20% at times as well. So the norm that you typically see on a nationwide level is maybe 2 to 4, again, kind of similar to the loans, but can you get away with lower? It depends on the opportunity. You may see in your assessment area and your state that those are lower because there's less opportunity. So use these and kind of look for a middle ground. Now, this gives you the range, and you're going to pick somewhere in between likely. Now, if you're going for outstanding, it'd be great if you could find a comparable with an outstanding community development rating. In setting these, we don't really care about the overall rating, right? We just want to know how they were rated for community development because that's how we're establishing these targets. So adjust for any of those weird things in here. And also this one, I typically put, if they're a first-time ISB, the numbers are typically on the lower end. So that might be on the bottom range of what you want. Like this 0.5 is you probably want higher than that. You don't want to be at the 0.5, depending on what your opportunity is. If you've only got donations, you might even be lower than that if you don't have any bonds that qualify. And over here, this one was weird. I noted that a quarter of their portfolio by dollar amount was consumer loans, so by numbers, a huge amount, which typically isn't going to have a lot of community development activity. That's not where you see a lot of these ratios driven by. So this number, if they didn't have those consumer loans, would actually be a little bit higher. So just keep an eye on that stuff. Read through those. The other really great thing about reading through your comparables PEs, even though they don't specifically say what the organization is or what the bond was, you'll get a feel for maybe some new opportunities that you haven't thought about in those assessment areas that they're operating in, and that'll give you some light bulb ideas to go out and expand what you're taking credit for in community development in those areas. So you're going to set that up. You're going to say, hey, look at this is the range. Here's what our target is and what we're shooting for and what our opportunities are. And you're going to talk to your management and say, here's what I think the goals and targets should be for the next review period or for the next year. Of course, these are typically, and I think all of these were about a 3-year period because we're talking ISBs at this point. in the past evaluation or exam periods. Now some of those are changing, so you got to kind of watch for that as well. And you can back the ratio into a dollar amount for the next year if you're going to be that specific, or maybe your management is comfortable with just saying, hey, we want a 3.0 community development loans to average total loans ratio. That's what we're shooting for. And then you can back in dollar amount and back in by year. Hopefully this has been a great help. I want to do one more thing real quick. As people are getting their feet under them for the first time ISBs and ISBs in general, you might just be using Excel kind of like this. And if you want a spreadsheet that actually is a tracking mechanism and then can calculate some of these ratios for you, although you would have to go out and enter some of the information off of call reports and whatnot, you can go ahead and email me at nate@faircommunitycreditsolutions.com, and I can send you a spreadsheet if you're on the lower end of the ISB side. That might be where you want to start. However, just like with fair lending and everything else in fair banking, software, especially if you're a larger bank or you've been doing this for a while, and you start to realize the documentation ends up kind of all over the place and you want to become more organized, software can be really helpful in this area. So one that I'm aware of that does have a CRA solution is Compliance Tech, and they have, forgive me, I'm looking at Dana Ginsburg profile here. She can give you make an appointment with you and actually walk you through the software because I don't have access to it. But look here at what their software will do for you. It helps centralize the data for services, loans, investments, donations, and grants. So it's giving you an organization mechanism to track it and kind of keep it organized and then get it all in place. Document tracking, automated reports, charts, and maps. So if you start doing this and feel overwhelmed, reach out to Dana and have her give you kind of a walkthrough of what they offer. There are other options out there as well, but Dana's been really good. They've got some lending software or fair lending software as well, but they also have this community development software that is one opportunity for you. So if you find you're struggling with keeping it all together, this is one good option for you. We're going to go ahead and end this video here. We've got a couple more in this CRA series for ISBs and focus on community development, just giving you a fighting chance against rules that are skewed against you if you're a community bank. Bye for now.